Today, we're going to unpack the international rulebooks that were created to control our planet's most dangerous waste. It's a pretty wild story, actually, full of toxic ships, high-stakes global negotiations, and a challenge that we're still facing today.
So let's start with a simple question. Where does our most dangerous garbage actually go? It seems straightforward, but the history behind that question is, well, it's pretty dramatic. Because not that long ago, the answer was genuinely shocking, and it exposed a huge, dangerous gap in how the world was managing its hazardous materials.
You see, back in the 1980s, the world was dealing with a massive crisis of what they called toxic trade. And this was way more than just a waste problem. It was a story of environmental injustice playing out on the open seas. Industrialized countries were churning out dangerous waste way faster than they could handle, and a pretty shadowy business popped up to make it disappear.
All right, so let's get right into what was happening, because this crisis is what really forced the world to wake up and create the global rules that we have today. I mean, just imagine this. You have these rogue vessels. They were literally called toxic ships, and they were just sailing around the world, loaded with poisonous cargo, looking for anywhere they could unload it. They became these international pariahs, infamous symbols of a totally lawless and incredibly dangerous system.
So, what was going on here? Well, it was like a perfect storm. First, the cost of getting rid of hazardous waste properly in developed nations just skyrocketed. This created a huge financial incentive for these so-called toxic traders to find, shall we say, cheaper options. They completely exploited the fact that there were no international laws, and they ended up dumping all this waste in developing nations, which, as you can imagine, had absolutely devastating consequences for people's health.
So, with all these shocking headlines and the obvious injustice of it all, there was a massive public outcry. The international community realized it couldn't just sit back and watch this happen. It had to act. And that action led to a truly landmark agreement. And this is the solution they came up with: the Basel Convention, which was adopted in March of 1989. Now, I know it looks like a dense legal text, but its core idea was actually pretty simple. Create a formal international treaty to control how hazardous waste moves around the world, and put a stop to that toxic free-for-all.
And right at its heart, the convention had this one simple, powerful goal. This wasn't just about shipping logistics or trade regulations. It was a humanitarian and environmental mission from the very beginning.
Okay, so what are we even talking about when we say hazardous waste? The convention defines it in two main ways. First, by its origin. Things like medical waste from a hospital. Or second, by its characteristics. Is it poisonous? Is it explosive? Is it corrosive? This definition ends up covering a huge range of materials.
So how do these rules actually work? How do you create a system of control and accountability? The whole idea was to take the movement of hazardous waste from being this secretive, dangerous thing to something that's transparent and, most importantly, safe. And it all really boils down to two core principles. First is prior informed consent, or PIC for short. This basically means a country can't just be used as a dumping ground. It has to know exactly what's coming and give explicit written permission. And second, environmentally sound management, which makes sure the waste is actually handled properly every step of the way.
And here's the kicker. This is what gave the agreement some real teeth. It officially made illegal traffic in hazardous waste a criminal act. It turned what was a shady business practice into an international crime and put those rogue traders on notice.
Okay, so the Basel Convention was a huge step forward for waste moving from one country to another. But what about the stuff that wasn't being shipped to a country at all? What about the waste that was just being dumped straight into the ocean? Well, that required a whole different set of rules.
And we need to be really clear here. We're not talking about accidental spills. Dumping means the deliberate, intentional act of getting rid of waste by just throwing it into the sea. And this specific problem needed its own specific solution.
So you've really got two major fronts in this battle. You have the Basel Convention, which manages waste as it moves between countries. Its rule is basically get permission before you ship. Then you have the London Convention, which deals with dumping waste into the sea. And its rule is much simpler. You are prohibited from dumping. Two different problems, two very targeted solutions.
But, as time went on and our scientific understanding grew, the world decided that even the original London Convention wasn't quite strong enough. So in 1996, they adopted something called the London Protocol, which totally shifted the approach from just managing dumping to preventing it altogether.
And this was a huge change in philosophy. See, older rules often had a blacklist, a list of things you couldn't do. The protocol flipped that completely on its head. It starts from the position that you can't dump anything. It's a much more precautionary approach that puts the burden of proof on anyone who wants to put something in the ocean.
Except for the things on this very short, very specific list. This is what's called a reverse list. Only these materials can even be considered for dumping. And even then, they have to go through a rigorous assessment and get a special permit. It effectively slammed the door shut on using our oceans as a global garbage can.
All right, so these agreements were signed decades ago. You might be wondering, why do these still matter so much today? Well, it's because the story of our waste is far, far from over.
I mean, think about it. The kinds of waste we create are constantly changing. The Basel Convention now gives us the framework to tackle modern challenges that its writers probably never even imagined, like the massive global tide of e-waste from our old phones and computers, or the safe way to dismantle enormous, aging ships. The problems evolve, but the principles hold up.
And that really is the key question, isn't it? These global agreements aren't just static documents gathering dust on a shelf. They are living, breathing frameworks that have to constantly adapt to face whatever's next, from microplastics to new industrial chemicals, if they're going to keep protecting our shared planet for the future.